Hello and welcome to the fourth Ask Me Anything, NEWIEE's latest virtual program that we started when COVID-19 came about. And we have been very fortunate to have some of the leading leaders and women in the industry, both in energy and environment. We've had directors of human resources from Mass CEC, all the way to a former FERC commissioner and regulator, and to a young professional from National Grid. And today, we are so honored to have Sara Burns, former president and CEO of Central Maine Power and current board member of Avangrid. But before we get into introducing Sara and having her come on to get some Ask Me Any questions, I'd like to do some housekeeping and just tell you that this event could not happen without our wonderful sponsors, Eversource, First Light Power, Mass CEC, and Robinson Co. We want to thank them. It was their sponsorship that allowed us to do these events, since all of our in-person events had to be canceled or postponed. So we cannot thank them enough. But speaking about events, I would love, well, let me first let me speak about the events, and then I'll get to how to ask questions. So speaking of events, I do want to point out, and I'll talk about this again at the end, we have a fabulous Women Shaping the Agenda. It's always been an incredible event in person. So we have to make sure it's an incredible event even when it's virtually online. It's July 23rd. Our keynote speaker is Alicia Barton, former CEO of NYSERDA and former CEO of Mass CEC. We have a panel discussion, and it's up here on the screen, of some fabulous women with tremendous backgrounds. It's something you really need to definitely register for, sign up, and do it today. And you can do that by going to NEWIEE.org and register for Women Shaping the Agenda. Now, for today's event, Ask Me Anything, it is literally that. Ask Sara Burns any question you want. So how do you do that? On the bottom of your screen, you'll see there's a Q&A section where you can put your question. I'll be looking at those questions and asking them of Sara, and Sara will be answering to them. When are you ever going to have an opportunity to ask a person on a board of directors, one of the leading utilities in our region, a question? And so this is a great opportunity. I hope you take advantage of it. So what I'd like to do now, I'd like Sara to give back about this about Burns. I've known her for many years. She's a very dear friend, as well as someone I think I've asked a lot of questions throughout my career, and so it's great to have Sara be a part of today's discussion. Sara comes to us with 30 years experience in the energy sector. She started her career at Central Maine Power, and from that, in the HR department, she rose up to the ranks of president, then CEO, and that happened from 1998. She became president in 1998, CEO in 2005, and of Central Maine Power, one of the largest utilities in Maine. And in 2015, she became part of the network function of Avangrid, and now board member of the Avangrid network. So it's incredible story from starting off in a job. Sara, I've heard the story, but I'd love for you to share it with our viewers today on how you started off at Central Maine Power and rose up to become the CEO of the utility and now the board of directors. So I'd like to ask the first question is, can you tell us that journey and some of the experiences that you got from that?
Oh, okay. Well, thank you, Mary. And before I answer the question, I want to thank NEWIEE. I think this whole idea of powering through COVID-19 by coming up with something like this, just really out of the box, is what a great idea. So I compliment all the NEWIEE people who have set this up.
Well, thank you. We've had some great talks, and I'm looking so forward to today's talk.
Okay, so you asked the question that could, we could talk about this for an hour, but here's the funny part of my story. I applied for a job. I actually worked for 38 years in corporate America, 4 corporations, 30 of them at Central Maine Power. I was at Unum and I saw a job at Central Maine Power, and I applied and I got a nice form letter that said I wasn't qualified. And I always regret not keeping that form letter. And then about 9 months later, I'm sitting at my desk and I get a phone call from HR at CMP, and they asked if I was willing to interview with the president of CMP for that job I applied for 9 months prior. So I did. And the day I was supposed to interview, I was supposed to drive from Portland, Maine to Augusta, Maine. It's about an hour ride, and it snowed hard all day. And they called me and said, don't come. And I said, no, I'll come. And, I gave myself about 3 hours. I walked in the CMP building with 1 minute to spare, and I was a little shaken, and I had an interview, and I got the job. So I've always said it was meant to be, I think. But
yeah.
And I started in finance and risk management because that was really my background, insurance. The interesting thing is my first big challenge was to figure out workers' compensation, which in Maine then was a complete disaster. And then I was asked to go into HR, and I thought, how cliche, I'm a woman in finance, which is probably better for my career. You want to send me into HR? But then they said if I went into HR, they'd give me more responsibility, which I did. And then I moved up in HR to be the head of HR. And my big challenge in HR, think about this, my job was to set up a 401k plan, which when they first mentioned it to me, I had no idea what it was, but we got it done. And the timeline in the utility industry is kind of, when I got there, we were fighting to keep Maine Yankee open. Then we were fighting deregulation. Deregulation went through. Maine's law is different than anybody else. You had to split the distribution and the transmission company. We spent 2 years splitting the companies, and then there's a big discussion about who's going to run the companies. And they asked me if I run the distribution company, which I truly was shocked by, because I'm in HR and I was spending a lot of time just figuring out where people were going to end up in these two companies. I was given distribution in July, and that following February, we had the biggest storm in the history of the state of Maine, the ice storm in '98, which was an MBA for me in the utility industry in 21 days. And then we got sold. We got sold to a New York company. So I went through the whole buyout, which there's probably a lot of people listening who've been through buyouts. And I learned in a buyout, your attitude is going to define your future. And the closer you are to the top, the closer you are to the door in a buyout. That's just the reality. So I kept a very positive attitude, and I was named president of Central Maine Power Company after the buyout. And then we were bought out again in 2008. And this time we went to one of the biggest utilities in the world, Iberdrola. And again, I kept a very positive attitude, tried to figure out what this new world was like, asked all the employees to stay with me. And we went on to win 7 J.D. Power Awards. We won $100 million from the DOE to put in smart meters, and we upgraded the transmission system. We spent $1.4 billion, biggest project ever in the history of Maine. So I've had a lot of interesting times. I had a lot of interesting times in the utility industry.
Well, and I think that that's incredible for our viewers to definitely start asking the questions, because we are in a flux right now. There's a lot going on in the industry. And I just wanted to see if you could focus in on that, what you see as the biggest change. And if you had a crystal ball, I mean, you're on the board of directors of Avangrid. I'm sure you've had these conversations. Where do you see things moving towards in the energy sector? And if you could just tell us what you see are the futuristic things, because we have a lot of young professionals who want to get involved in this sector, and I'd love to have them have that kind of insight.
Yeah, so Mary, if I had a crystal ball, I wouldn't be sitting here on the 3rd floor of my house in the state of Maine.
True. But you have a lot of years of experience, so you've seen a lot, and you've seen that there are trends. So I just was wondering, do you see another trend happening? I mean, you went through deregulation and all.
Well, this is my general answer to that question. We for the 20 of the 30 years I was at CMP, we were in an extraordinary state of change, constant change. All of us were, all the industry was. The only question was how fast the change was, what was the next change coming? And I used to say to everybody, this isn't going to stop. Don't say, oh, we'll get this done and it will stop. It's not going to stop. I mean, you just think how technology has driven this industry, or you think about how the environmental push to green up the industry has driven the industry. And I think all of that is going to continue to push change in these jobs. And what I would encourage people to think about, I think we're going to continue to reshape. If you thought about the New England utilities 20 years ago and today, it's just amazing what we've all been through. But I think we're going to continue to go through that. There's going to be reshaping. And what I would encourage young professionals to do is step up, and raise your hand and say you're interested in trying something, and really take on some new challenges.
Now, we have a great mentoring program at NEWIEE, and we really encourage people to get involved. Did you have mentors in your career that you can point to? And if so, what was some of the, how did you go about finding a mentor, and how did you develop that relationship with a mentor?
So that's a great question. So when I think back to my first experience when I took over HR, I actually had to do a board presentation. So first time I was in the boardroom, and I met one of the board members coming and go, and I met, and he gave me some feedback on my board presentation. And whenever we had the monthly meetings, I would reach out to him. I mean, he reached out to me, then I reached out to him. He was an incredible leader of one of the biggest businesses in the state of Maine. And he gave me a lot of good advice. And then there was a second board member who was head of one of the biggest banks. And I always thought, because he had a lot of daughters, that he was a little bit more helpful than some of the other board members. And he did the same thing. He kind of reached out to me on one particular issue. And it opened the door for me to reach out to him. And he was with me during the first buyout, which was extraordinary to get advice from a business leader. And he's the one who said, you want to survive a buyout, step up, hold your head up, smile, be optimistic. He gave me really good advice. And so again, I think I was kind of lucky to have that in the beginning of my career. And who knows if it was circumstances or they were just such great men that they thought it's my job to reach out. I don't know. I never really had that kind of conversation with them. But.
Well, let's have a little bit of that conversation, because you mentioned they were men, and this industry is traditionally very male dominated. So right. We've had many conversations in NEWIEE. We have a diversity and inclusion committee now that I co-chair with Carter Wall. How do we get more women into this industry, and how do we deal with the diversity and inclusion issue, especially for this industry? Do you have any thoughts?
If you ask me one of my regrets in my career, I would put that as it's easy to look back now, but I wish I had done more formally. I think I did a lot informally, but effective leadership is to recognize the problem, talk about the problem, and physically put it on your back and go forward and come up with solutions to the problem. And if we want to change diversity and in utilities, I think that's what the utilities have to start doing. They have to be more just overt about it. And people ought to ask about that. What are we doing in terms of giving all people the fairest chance?
Well, we do have someone who has said, you're a board member, and what did you find? What's the difference between being a CEO and being a board member? And can you tell us that transition and what it's like?
Okay, it's an interesting transition, and it's a transition where you really have to start talking to yourself and remind yourself, because I remember in the first board meeting, I was going to jump in and correct someone who was making a presentation. I'm like, I kept my mouth shut, but I thought, okay, wait, I'm in a different role. Yeah. You're no longer in the management of the company. You have to remember you've stepped up. You're in the strategic. The board is legally responsible for the company. They set the strategic direction. They select the CEO. They evaluate the CEO. They make sure there's proper governance, but they don't manage. And I think that's the big difference where you have to, you know, and particularly if you're going to step up on your own board and you're so familiar with all the issues, that's where you have to be careful. And it was an interesting transition for me, because what I didn't want to end up doing is, when management came in to do presentations, I would put issues on the table that I knew more about than they did and make it uncomfortable. So I had to work at it. I had to think about it.
And we don't have many women in boards. And I know that you've been doing some work with the Boston group on that. Could you talk about that? What is, because we have a question here from Shannon Ames, is what is her advice for women to become board members? Like, how can we get more women in board roles? And not the nonprofits, because we've all done the nonprofits. I'm on a lot of nonprofit boards. Matter of fact, I have to say no to some of them because it's like, it can eat up a lot of your time. I think we're really looking for where we can take our area of expertise and apply it in the industry boards and see more involvement there.
So I was part of a panel for Deloitte, and I think they're working with the Boston Women Group, and we were talking about, my portion of the panel was how to write a bio to be on the board. But we talked about a lot of topics about getting on boards. And you know, Mary, depending on who we're talking to in this phone conversation, depending on where you are in the corporation, clearly if you're a woman with the CEO title, you're going to be more recognized and put on a list. So if you're not a woman with the CEO title, how do you do this? One of the ways you do it, I served on 8 nonprofit boards, and it was when you're in the utility industry, it's very important to do, be part of your community and give back. But I also served as vice chair and chair of many of those boards, and I learned a ton by being vice chair and chair of many of those boards. And it also gave me a lot, you know, on your board bio, one of the questions they ask, what board service do you have? And they'll, you know, if you've had nonprofit board service and you've been a leader on that nonprofit board, I think it's an important thing to say. So, okay, first, what you want to do, if you want to do it, I think you've got to think about a plan. And you've got to think about, you know, so what are your interests? Are you interested in getting on a utility board, an insurance board? You ought to be answering that question. You ought to think about writing a board bio. It's different than a resume. It talks about what your expertise are. It talks about what you've done. It's like 4 paragraphs. It's 1 page. Okay. It talks about if you've had board experience, so that nonprofit can help. And it talks about who you are personally, educationally, some of your big achievements. But you also got to make people, you got to make the people aware you're interested. You can't just say, I wish somebody would call me. Any opportunity you have, right after I retired, whenever I saw someone, I would say, you know, I would like to find another board. I'd like to be on another board. So, you know, you've got to step up a little bit and raise your hand. If you're ever called by a recruiter, a lot of the big recruiters have board recruiting. And so suppose they call you up and say, are you interested in this job? And you're not interested. First of all, be good to them and give them some names of people that are interested. And after you're good to them, say, and by the way, I do have one interest. I hope you could add me to a list. So you've got to raise your hand.
Well, I think that's great. And we have another question coming in here from Dwayne. What are your opinions on business school and grad school? Do you feel it's necessary? Did you find it for you? Did you do graduate school? Does it stand out in the application? And basically, what do you think? Should I go in and do more and more education, spend more and more money? I always used to say to people, if your company pays for some of that, definitely take advantage of that. But what do you think of getting more education?
So Mary, I would agree with you 100%. If you have company-sponsored MBA programs or executive programs, raise your hand and sign up. And today, would I leave the workforce to go get them? I don't think so. I mean, I think if you're interested, I'd find an employer that wants to send you.
Did Central Maine Power have a program for people to get more?
We aligned with one of the companies in Maine, and then when we became part of Iberdrola has a worldwide MBA program where they pick people from all over the world and send them to an MBA program. And it's an extraordinary program. But you know, if I was a young professional today, my strategy would be to get somebody to pay me for additional education. Also, I would encourage you So there's all kinds of online groups you can join. National Association, NACD, the National Association of Corporate Directors. Even if you're on a nonprofit board, you can join that. And you know what they give you? Webinars. Webinars on all kinds of issues related to boards. So I also, leadership. You need to prove leadership. So what you ask yourself, what have I done to improve my leadership skills?
That's a really interesting question. How do you define leadership? What do you see are the skill sets you need for leadership?
So if I'm a young professional and I was in an interview and someone asked me, would you tell me what you've done that would show that you've led something? My answer I would want to answer, well, I had a team and our responsibility was to put in 200,000 smart meters, and I had to do it in 1 year, and I had this budget, and I got it done. You've got to be able to speak to, I owned something, I had a team, I got it done. That's my simplest example. But also you could use it for, if you're on a nonprofit, and the nonprofit you were on the board, and you're head of raising money, the most fun for nonprofits. But you did it,
Yes.
they wanted to raise $100,000. I had a group, I did it. It is showing that you took something, you finished it, you got results. That's what if somebody was talking to you about what you bring to the board, you want to be able to say what you bring to the board.
So I'll do a shout out for NEWIEE. We're always looking for any women who want to join NEWIEE and help us raise money. We will definitely give you all that opportunity because we are all volunteer board. Our whole organization is volunteers, so it's we pride ourselves on that. But what skill, other than that, getting something done, that's more like an action. What do you think the skill sets you have to have? What kind of personality? I mean, if you had to name the top 3 things that you look for in somebody for leadership, what are those 3 top things that you looked when you were in HR and then all of a sudden all the way up to being the president? I mean, what did you look for in an individual?
So number 1, I would try to evaluate, do they know how to build a team?
Okay.
So I would ask a lot of questions about team building and how you've worked with people and how you've been on a team and what role did you play in that team? So and all those questions would be about trying to figure out, do you know how to build a team? Number 2, I would try to figure out, do you understand that the role of a leader, you can use any term, vision, mission, strategic direction, project goal. The role of a leader is to understand where you're going. And you've got to be able, it's simple on a team. It gets more complex when you move up into a corporation. But, I try to evaluate, do you get that? Do you get that if you're in a leadership position, you've got to be able to articulate the mission, the vision, the goal, whatever it is. So I would look for that. I also always looked for people who understood that in leadership, you've got to be the optimistic energy. It is you that people look to for energy and optimism. And so if you're a glass half full person, I struggle with putting you in a leadership position. And it's not, I'm not saying it's always a failure, but I was looking for somebody who understood the whole, I've got to carry that weight.
Well, that's really interesting because we have another question coming in about career changes. So if I'm entering from the consulting service, it's funny because I did the reverse. I went from being in the corporate to a consulting, but if I'm going from consulting and I want to go onboarding into a power company utility, what advice could you give me on making that change?
Well, my first question would be, where are you going in? What is it that you're looking at? Because the one thing that people are looking for today is if you want to keep moving up, you have to have a broad understanding of the business. And so let's say you're a consultant and you've been doing mostly, you know, I'm just going to make this up, you've been kind of on the finance side. I would encourage you to get into operations, so that you get a broader understanding of the business. I'd also be, if you were a consultant, have you had any leadership opportunities in terms of team management or people? And if you haven't, make sure that's what you get when you move in. So you're really broadening your skill set in that move. That's what I would look to do, broaden my skill set in that move.
And the utility, let's just go focus in on that for a second. The grain of the utility, we've heard about that there's a very senior group of people that work in the utility. We're not attracting the young people. Can you tell us why that is? What do you see as the number one barrier as to why utilities are just not attracting the type of young professionals to enter into it?
I think it's not very complex. I think the young professionals look at it and say, that's not very exciting. I mean, that's not, you know, that's not a hot, you know, that's not a hot technology company or a leading, you know, they don't see it as leading edge. But utilities are doing a lot of stuff that is leading edge.
I was just going to say they are.
They got to do a better, I mean, we had an extraordinary team in 2010, 11, and 12 who did the smart meters. And we got a lot of young people to come in through that, because that was incredible. That was an incredible project, because we not only had to put in the meters, we had to build the infrastructure to read the meters. So could we do a better job selling? Could the utility business do a better job selling that this is a very interesting? I also said to young people in the business for the last 5 years I was there, I said, if you stick around and you broaden your skills and your experience, you could be running this place, because you know, the average age is so high. And I think the next time the economy roars, because that's when the retirements go up, the utility retirements will go up again, and there is huge opportunity. But we have to make it, the utility industry has to be better at pitching, okay, what is interesting about this?
And if you had looked back at your career over the time that you've been involved, especially at Avangrid and Central Maine Power, what would you think was one of the most proudest moments you had? And what would you think is one of those, I wish I could get a do-over? Or I was going to use a golf term, but I know how much you love golf. Oh my God. But what would you say? What was the proudest thing, and what is one of the things you wish you had gotten a mug on?
So, you know, I think one of my biggest challenges was when we were sold the first time. And the employees were looking for okay, change is over. We've been through deregulation. We've split up the company. We fought the Maine Yankee. I mean, we've had it. And now we've been sold to this crowd from New York. I mean, I heard this for 12 straight months. And I came up with the way I talk to employees for almost a year, to the point where they if I see one of them, they'll remember this, how to bring them along. And I learned this, I learned this because I went to some conference. I don't know why this guy was talking about M&A, but he talked about when you go through a merger and acquisition, especially when you're bought, he goes, you should think about the fact that when you go to work every day, you're in a road race, and you know all the rules of the race, you know all the players, you know the cheaters, you know the good people, you know the people who run hard every day, you know the people who don't care. That's work every day. The day you're bought, your race is over, done, everything stopped, and there's a race over there. And you've got to actively decide to go get in that race, start running, and learn it all over again. And for 12 months, I had that discussion with employees in Maine about, I'm in the race and I want you to come with me. And I'll run ahead, I'll try to figure it out, I'll share things with you, but we're going to do this. We're a great company and we can be a great company. And And it was I learned a lot about change during that period, about how you get people to think about change and accept it. So many people just wanted to talk about why do we sell to these people, and I'm like, stop. We're not talking about that. We're getting in the race. We're going to outrun them. We're going to be the heroes. We're going to be the stars. We're going to be extraordinary. So I've always felt good about that. That was an extraordinary challenge. And we did it, and then we did it a second time. Oh, Mary, my list of regrets.
Well, they can't be that many, but if you could choose one.
I don't know. I think toward the end, at the last year of my career, I wish I had pushed harder in better communications, and push for more PR that would have helped the company through the transition. I think that might be one of my big regrets.
And you decided to retire, and that must have been a very difficult decision for you. I mean, considering you spent so many years at Central Maine Power and you built your whole career. It was like a family to you. For the people that are, we always talk to the young professional, but I like to talk to now the people that are more towards the later part of their years. Was that a decision that you took time to make, or was it a sudden thing? Was it, how did you wrestle with that? Because I love to give balance. We talk to young professionals, but now we're talking people that might be at the later part of their career and trying to figure out, is there life after I leave my job? And very few people would even think about staying in a company for 30 years,
Right. Yeah. I don't think that will happen very much anymore. People won't be 30 years. No, my thought process was, I retired right after I turned 62, and I had 30 years. And I think that one of the biggest mistakes made by executives is they never know when to leave. And a lot of them stay way too long, way past when they should leave. And I, probably for the last 2 years in the back of my mind, I thought, I should just pick a time that makes sense and go off and do new things. And 19 years as a CEO where this job is 24/7. Anytime the wind starts to blow or it starts to snow, anytime I was anywhere in the state of Maine, I was working, because people would come up to me and ask me questions, and and
yep.
I was, the expectation is I would spend the time answering the questions. That's fine, I did it, but it never stops, and it still goes on. I actually said to somebody at the grocery store the other day, "Do you know I'm retired?"
Well, that shows you were so good that they feel like they have someone they can reach out to.
Yeah, but I think it's a personal decision. I kind of thought about it in terms of 30 years, 62.
Right.
I'm still on 3 nonprofit boards, which I love and are important to me, and I'm on the Avangrid board, so that gives me plenty to do. But it was hard leaving, because I would tell you a majority of my time I love my job.
Well, this next question we have is talking about your job, and it's 2 parts. One is, how is it working in a regulated industry? Could you dive a little into that yin and yang, that you're a company, but you're a regulated company? And how did that play into it? And then I'll ask the second part of the question.
So I think that's a great question. And, I will say this to all of you in the utility industry, as a board, one of the expertise that people look for on board are people with experience in regulation. So just remember that. But
wow, that's a good point.
Yeah.
No, I just, all my utility friends out there, you're in a regulated industry. This is another.
Yeah, because and there's a lot of other boards in regulated industry, and your experience is an expertise that's important. So I over the years, I had my whole attitude about the regulatory world probably kind of shifted and changed. But I remember when we were bought out by Iberdrola in 2008, and we met the chairman the first time, Ignacio Galan. And I remember this was a, hello, I'm your chairman, welcome to Iberdrola, this is how I see the world. We own utilities around the world. And one of the things he was very focused on was the regulatory framework, and that we should not run the company for the regulatory framework. We should run a great company and meet all the regulations. And and I thought, okay, that is a great attitude, because all the people in the industry know historically that there's some companies that were run just in the regulatory framework, which is not a positive way to run a company. And I also strongly believe, the more I got to know about customer satisfaction, that the higher level of customer satisfaction you have, the better regulatory and political relationship you have, and the better regulatory framework you have to work in. And so I ran the company in that view. Regulations are regulations. You follow them, period. There's no discussion. If you have a problem with them, you go into the commission, and you pursue them in that way. But your attitude should be you follow them. But I think as a CEO, I always thought of what Ignacio Galan said: run a great company.
Well, the second part of this question is, because you're a regulated industry, and we know that the commissioners of the PUCs are appointed by the governor, the upcoming state and federal elections, any recommendations on how to maneuver the evolving political landscape, both on the state and the federal level?
Yeah, so I think, and I remember, I'm going to remind all of you, I kind of grew up and learned this as I grew up in the industry. But it wasn't hard to figure out that regardless of who is in your commission or who is in your state house, you need to have a good relationship. You need to build a relationship. You need to be able to make a phone call, to find out something, to report. In Maine, if you're in a big storm, I wanted access to the governor. I didn't care who the governor was. I wanted access to the governor to keep them comfortable with what we were doing, to ask them if one of the early challenges I had in storms was getting help over the Canadian border. It took 100 hours to get a truck over the Canadian border. You're always calling the governor for help. If you don't have a good relationship, they're not going to pick up the phone. So utility leaders, it is their job to have relationships. In the Public Utilities Commission, I would go in once a quarter and meet with the commissioners, with the team. We weren't allowed to talk about cases per se, but we were just allowed to report on general issues going on at the company. It was just a good way to stay in touch and have a relationship where they heard from me, they saw me, they understood what was going on with the company. They could ask questions, they could ask, come down and talk about this. So I think it's something that is important to do, and you've got to figure out how to do it in a way that works and builds a relationship.
So it sounds like relationship, communication, those are like so key. Absolutely.
And so regardless of who wins the next round of these elections in our states, I would say you've got to be prepared to have a plan on how you're going to build relationships. I also did it at the federal level. I knew our senators. I knew our congressmen and women. I went to visit them regularly. Avangrid had a very good annual trip to Washington where we take all the CEOs. We go and see our delegation, and the whole purpose was simply to say, this is what we're doing. We're here. Get comfortable with us if you need anything. So again, relationship building, very, very important.
So Avangrid covers multiple states. You have utilities in New York, you have utilities in Connecticut, you have utility in Massachusetts, you have utilities in Maine. Regional issues, let's talk a little bit about that. I mean, here's Avangrid, crosses all of these, pretty much the Northeast. what do you think we could get? How could we get a successful regional issue? What do you think what issues out there that could be a regional successful issue that we could all rally behind? Seems to be a hard thing to get us all talking and working. So I'm just curious, what do you see as and NEWIEE is, we love to talk about this because we are a regional group ourselves.
Yeah. Mary, that's a great question. You know, in preparation for today's meeting, I went on, and hopefully everybody on this phone call has downloaded the ISO to Go app, the ISO New England app, because there's lots of information on there that you can look at every day. But the one I'm always curious about is, you know, the minute-to-minute report on what fuels we're using in New England.
Correct.
To create electricity today. And this morning at 8:20, I think the load was about 15,000 megawatts, so it's not a really heavy load. It's probably gotten heavier as the day went on. And we were, don't hold me exactly, but I think we were 85%, like 25% nuclear, 65% natural gas, 7% hydro, 8% renewable, something like that. Mm-hmm. And what's really interesting about that from my perspective is if you went on Google and you went back and you found New England stats from 2000 and you annualized that question and you looked at annually in 2000, what did that look like? You know what you'd find? 25 to 30% nuclear, about 40% between gas and coal, 5% renewables, 5% hydro, and the rest natural gas. Is all we have done in this time period is we switched out coal and oil. So it was about, in 2000, it's probably 40% coal and oil for natural gas. So yep. New England, you know what we should work on? Fuel diversification.
Right. And it would be great for us. It's depending on how, it's so complicated because you have the transmission issues and then you have the distributive energy and you have the clean energy and the concern with all that goes. But I agree with you, fuel diversity, and we should talk about that and try to develop a plan for it because we do have plans for 2050. We want to be, most of the states have adopted a net zero emissions from carbon. So it's the, as always it is in the details of getting us there. But someone has asked a question. It's up to you if you feel comfortable answering it, but since you've departed as president of Central Maine Power, the person asked the question, CMP has gone through some PR issues, and they just want to know if you could provide any type of insight on that and any way of seeing what's the outcome of all this. Do you see any positive aspects that are going to come out of all this?
I do. I'm a very optimistic person.
Right. And I can attest to that.
I'm very positive. And, you know, I say to people, the same approximately 1,000 people are in Maine that were in Maine when I was there. And, you know, I think I kind of visualize what's going on at Maine as this kind of intersection, and entered in the intersection was we cut over a new billing system in the middle of the biggest storm ever, the hardest winter ever, where bills went way up. And people didn't understand that hard winter was why the bills went up, not the billing system. And we bid on the Massachusetts clean energy bid, and through all the work out of that, we end up winning it, and we announced we're going to build a line through Maine. All of that entered into that intersection. And in that intersection, you have, I mean, you know, I've been discouraged by the people fighting the project. Some of the fossil fuel owners are fighting the project bitterly. And I think they've played a role in the other issues too, because the more they can up the other issues. So I'm optimistic one by one, those issues are going to be figured out. The billing system's been looked at 10 times. The Public Utilities Commission and consultants have said the billing system works. So I think they got to just plow through and keep working on the PR.
And that going after the Massachusetts 83D for the hydro, why was that? Why were you so passionate for that? And if you can explain why you think that that's such a critical piece to the whole solution of getting us to a cleaner energy sector.
So, I go back to what we were talking about a few minutes ago,
Yeah.
why I look at ISO to go and look at the fuels we're using, and try to understand the historic perspective of what we've actually accomplished in all these years, which is very little. And I think people don't get it. People don't get how little we've actually, what we've accomplished is, we're not burning coal and we're not burning oil, except for we probably could on extraordinary days. But, that's not 40%, but we just moved it to natural gas. And is that really what people wanted to accomplish? And so when we bid in Massachusetts, we bid because we thought we had a great way, the quickest way, the easiest way to get into Hydro-Quebec, get 1,200 megawatts of clean hydropower. Because we own in Western Maine, you need about 145 miles of transmission line to get to the first 345 substation in Lewiston, Maine. And we owned about 3/4 of it, we operated in it. And so we needed to clear another 75 feet. And then we needed to procure about 50 miles, which we did. And from my view, and from Avangrid's view, and from Iberdrola's view, we thought this is probably just kind of the cleanest shot into Quebec. And we have a relationship with Hydro-Quebec, and we always have had because we're neighbors. And 1,200 megawatts, if today, and again, I was looking at this morning, if we were only using 15,000 megawatts, 1,200 megawatts is no chump change. It can make an impact on what fuels we're using. And that's really, we really in New England need to get behind the idea if we're going to change it, then we've got to make some tough decisions and do some projects. And we can do big projects and we can do little projects. We can do all kinds of projects, but we got to get going and we got to make some changes.
So on that, I'd like to ask you a personal question. We've asked this of everyone's Ask Me Anything. So, because we're coming, believe it or not, the hour has gone by. It's been amazing. It's gone so quickly. And it's a great privilege for me to have this opportunity to talk to you because you have such an incredible, fascinating background. And I have found over the years working with you and getting to know you that I really admire. It's wonderful. And I encourage all the NEWIEE women that are watching is we do have some fabulous women in leadership roles. And Sarah's still in the board. So before I get my last question, you just had a CEO changeover in Avangrid. And you did say that was one of the responsibilities. So I assume you were a part of that. And I just was wondering if, because it's fairly new, so a lot of people might not know that there's a new CEO, if you wanted to just give us a little inside behind closed doors, what it was like to go through that process. And then I'll ask you the one question we ask. So like being a picky,
So Mary, you're freezing up a little bit, but
I said, what was it like to pick a new CEO or being on a board of directors?
Okay, so let me explain the Avangrid structure. There's an Avangrid board for all the assets in the United States. I'm not on that board. There's an Avangrid board for just the network companies. I'm on that board. So our CEO is established. They pick the CEO for the bigger responsibility, and he hasn't started yet, but I'm excited. I think he's got a great background. I think he's going to bring some new, fresh ideas to the company, and I think a lot of people are excited about this transition.
Well, that's great. So the last question we ask of every person we've done that Ask Me Anything is, if you had to think of the best piece of advice you got over your whole career, what was it, and did you actually listen and implement it?
Best piece of advice I got over my whole career.
Yeah. And we'd like you to tell us who gave you that advice. It can be someone professional or personal. And did you take that person's advice and implement it?
Wow, when I thought you were going to ask me a personal question, I thought I didn't think it was that, but I'm trying to think. Best piece of advice I got.
We are actually getting a recording from everyone, and then we're going to actually put it together in a little book that we are going to then give it out. So we'd love to hear yours.
Okay. A manager I had early on at my first job in Philadelphia, Chubb, an insurance company, a boutique insurance company. They wanted me to move to Kansas City, and they sent me out to Kansas City, and I didn't want to move to Kansas City. And it was funny because he said to me, in your career, if you want to move up, you've got to step up. And so if you're offered something, you've got to step up. And I thought to myself, remember, I'm still pretty young.
Yeah.
Not to Kansas City.
I'm not stepping up there.
Right. Of course, now I would love to go out and try that, but I didn't have a good view. But the interesting thing is, I figured out within 6 months of saying no that I shouldn't have said no, and so I stepped out and I found a new job at Marsh, and I knew that was the right thing to do, and that was the last time I ever said no.
No. Wow.
Every opportunity I was offered, I took it, and I stepped up. So.
Well, there you go. And we are so thankful that you stepped up and took on the role at Central Maine Power, now taking on a role at the board of directors. I would like to offer, if it's totally up to you, we love to keep you connected. Sara is a NEWIEE awardee in 2015. We have really appreciated all your dedication to NEWIEE and your time and your effort and helping us and really providing an opportunity for everybody in the NEWIEE family to ask you questions. And I can't thank you enough for being so open and honest and willing to share, your story, answer any questions. It's been really wonderful. And thank you. And I hope that we can still have you stay involved in NEWIEE and be involved in NEWIEE and still continue to be a big supporter of our efforts.
Thank you, Mary. And Mary, thank you. This was fun. Thank you for the great questions. And I applaud, I just can't say it enough, I applaud NEWIEE for doing this. Great idea, great way to keep people connected and give people an opportunity to just keep plowing through this mess.
Well, I have to tell you, the Q&A and everything's blowing up with people saying, thank you, Sara. We really appreciate it. This has been wonderful. And we try to provide this balance of people, young professionals who are like just thrown into the job and trying to find their way, to more senior members who have had a lifetime career who can say, hey, this is what I learned from the job, and this is what I have gotten. And I think actually today it was fabulous to hear all of your advice. And matter of fact, gave me an idea. I wrote down that we should do a board resume. So we might be calling you back to help us put together that kind of a webinar and really do a lot of promotion around it, because we do have the two ends, people that are coming in and the people who are thinking like, what's my next step towards the more later part of their career. So
it's a great idea. And again, thank you everyone. I had fun, and I hope you learned something.
Well, thank you, Sara. And what I'd like to do for the remaining few minutes is to talk about our upcoming events that we have coming on. And they are fabulous. The best one that I have to tell you that you have to sign up today is the Women Shaping the Agenda. We have not had an event like this where we're equitable access to clean energy, sustainable environment. These are fantastic speakers. We have people from the higher academia. We have people from municipalities, from foundations. So we really encourage everyone to sign up today, NEWIEE.org, July 23rd, and you can't miss it. We also have another Ask Me Anything coming up. Amy Dufour from Principal at Prime Impact Fund, August 12th. We have basically, we tried to do an Ask Me Everything on the first, on the Wednesday of the month. And so we did this because of COVID-19, but we're getting consensus that people are really enjoying this Ask Me Anything. And so if you would like to see this program continue onward, we would love to hear from our members as to whether or not they think Ask Me Anything should continue on as a Wednesday get-together fireside chat with women in the energy and environmental world. I want to thank all of the people that put together this, but most importantly, I want to thank our sponsors. Without them, we could not have this program. So I want to thank our sponsors at Eversource, First Light Power, Mass Clean Energy Center, Robinson and Cole. And like everything, as Sarah said, step up. We're asking you, if you're a woman out there, part of this program, and you've been listening to it, we're an all-volunteer group, NEWIEE. We would love to have your involvement. We would love to have you step up and become more involved in all of the programming that we offer at NEWIEE. We have a mentoring program. We have a young professional program. And we have tremendous activities that go on with all those groups. So we really hope that you take Sarah's advice and find ways to step up and get involved. So we can't thank you enough for tuning in. We know that, you know, it's nice weather out there and it's July, but we want to thank everyone who joined us today. And from behalf of NEWIEE, we thank you for listening, and we hope to see you listening again on July 23rd. Okay, take care. Mary Eustace saying goodbye.